You're listening to the Nurse Child Podcast, episode number 54.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey there, welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host, and you've tuned in to a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones, inside and out. Today, I am talking about heavy kids and how you can responsibly and sensitively help them be healthier, stronger, and confident in the bodies they live in, as well as I want to cover the harmful, negative approaches and strategies that might hurt their metabolism, self-esteem, and health. I'll talk about some newsworthy developments, share feedback from other nutritionists on the topic, and take you through some of the most important things you should do and things you should steer clear of. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over at jillcastle.com/054. That's 054 for episode number 54. If you think it's important to take care and great tact when feeding bigger kids, number one, I'd like you to share this episode on your Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages so more families can find it and listen in. And secondly, I'd like you to rate and review the Nourish Child Podcast in Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use to listen to this podcast. This pulls the Nourish Child up in rankings and makes it way easier for other parents, teachers, healthcare providers, and other people to find this show. This episode of the Nourish Child Podcast is brought to you by the Kids Healthy Weight Project course. Do you feel like you somehow missed out on the basics of nourishing your child? You probably did. Many parents strive to nourish their child well, but find themselves with lots of questions. In the Kids Healthy Weight Project course, you will get my blueprint for nourishing healthy children, inside and out. That means you'll get a food system that includes a balance of all foods, not a restrictive meal plan or diet, a feeding strategy that is proven to be effective and nurturing to children, and an infrastructure for building healthy habits and a lifestyle your child can grow on. Get the Kids Healthy Weight Project today by going to www.jillcastle.com/courses. Okay, I want to set the stage with the current climate when it comes to working with, dealing with, living with bigger kids. There's been a lot in the media lately about childhood obesity, some of it downright scary, some of it frustrating, and some of it even infuriating. So I want us to get on the same wavelength. And in doing so, I just want to sort of briefly cap what the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, how they define obesity. And they say it is the presence of excess unhealthy weight. The CDC defines obesity as having excess body fat. They measure this by using the body mass index, or the BMI, but they go on to state that it is moderately related to direct measures of body fatness. So what does that mean? It means that a higher BMI does not necessarily mean excess unhealthy weight for every person. Think about a big football player. They're bigger bone. They might have a lot more muscle mass. That does not mean that they are unhealthy. However, BMI, you might wonder, why are we always using it and always talking about it? Well, in children, it's often used because it's readily available to measure. It's a calculation between a child's height and their weight. So it's a quick and easy tool to measure the overall weight status of a person. My advice? Take your child's BMI measurement with a grain of salt. Ideally, I encourage all parents to be looking at your child's growth chart and look at the trends over time. Does your child have steady growth? Has he or she followed the growth channel that they've always been growing in? Or are there big jumps on that growth chart or plummets? Those are the things you want to be looking at. And when you're seeing these big variations, you want to talk with your healthcare provider about it. The other piece is BMI is traditionally used for children aged 2 to 20, not for infants, not for young toddlers. We assess them differently. So the CDC also goes on to explain where excess unhealthy weight may come from, and it comes from many factors. Many things can contribute to this, primarily genetics. So genetics, I often say to my families, is the blueprint your child was born with, predetermined. So there's not a lot of changing we can do about our genetics or our body weight, shape, and size as it relates to our natural blueprint. Metabolism is another factor that can contribute, or how your body changes food and oxygen into the energy it uses for daily functioning. Your community, where you live, the design of it, the safety of it. Does it allow you to go out or your child to go out and be active and play outside, or is it an unsafe environment for those types of activities? This can certainly have a factor and can contribute to a child's weight status. Sleep. Does your child get enough sleep? We know there's research that indicates that if a child does not get enough sleep, that can have an impact on their overall health status, including their weight status. And then, of course, what you eat and whether you're physically active can bear influence on a child's weight status. As I mentioned, genetic factors are difficult to change. As a parent, you have influence over your child's environment, such as food, feeding, how you interact, and your attitudes that you use when feeding your child. And I personally think that this is a huge factor, but we don't see too much talk about it when we look at the prevention programs for healthy weight. You also have influence over your child's activity levels, how much sleep they get, their daily habits, like how much TV they watch or video games that they play, and just general lifestyle behaviors. So again, keeping it real, there are things that you can enhance and promote and encourage that can help your child live a healthy lifestyle. And that's really the name of the game, in my opinion, is helping children learn to live in the body that they are given and optimize their day-to-day environment so it encourages all of the things that we know contribute to their health. Good food, activity, great rest, healthy habits, healthy attitudes, body love, all of those things. So that sort of sets the baseline. When we're talking about children's weight, it's nice to have a reference point. And the CDC is pretty clear on what we're talking about. And I think when we talk about weight, also, is a child functional in the weight and the body that they have? And if they are functional, they are energetic, they're growing well, they have a nice, happy, productive life, then in my opinion, we can optimize the things that we can optimize, but other avenues of changing body weight, shape, and size can be dangerous, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. I also want to talk about some of the stuff that's come up in the media lately. And number one, an article out of Mother Jones entitled "Childhood Obesity is Just Getting Worse" reported that over the past 4 years, child obesity rates have been pretty much steady, no increases in the prevalence rates and no reductions. And despite being well-funded and highly publicized national campaigns to combat it, excess weight has actually increased in certain groups. More recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a report entitled "Prevalence of Obesity and Severe Obesity in U.S. Children," and that was a report that reflected on 1999 through 2016. And what they said is that overweight rates, as measured by BMI, so take that into consideration based on what we just talked about, increased from 29% to 35% during that time period. And from 2014 to 2016, severe obesity among children ages 2 to 5 years increased from 9 to 14%. Hispanic and African American children were found to be at higher risk, and low-income preschoolers were more vulnerable to weight problems than their average income peers. So, furthermore, this article explored the public health prevention efforts like Let's Move, which brought exercise to underserved schools and made school meals and snacks healthier through the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act and the National School Lunch Program. They say have not been enough. That doesn't mean these efforts are wasted, in my opinion, but it does mean, I believe, that we aren't addressing what parents and kids really need. If you've watched my TEDx talk, you know that I'm of the mindset that we'll never gain traction until we start to systematically educate all parents from a very early point and continue to do so throughout each stage of childhood with more education related to the age and stage their child is in, guidance, and support along the way. One person was quoted in a commentary following this article out of Mother Jones, and they said, "Our public health approach to the epidemic has largely failed so far." And then thirdly, I want to mention Weight Watchers and their new program launching this summer. If you haven't heard about it, they're offering teens aged 13 to 17 and their families a free membership to help, quote unquote, the development of healthy habits at a critical life stage. In my opinion, this is not a good idea. I wrote about it in U.S. News and World Report. To me, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Counting points is counting calories, which is dieting. Let me say that again. Counting points is counting calories, which is dieting. We've known for decades the risks associated with dieting among young children and teens. For example, research in children and teens have found higher instances of weight gain and increased rates of binge eating disorder when dieting. Another study followed the dieting behaviors of teens for 5 years and revealed they had a doubled risk for becoming overweight. Still, other studies have highlighted dieting behaviors such as skipping meals and calorie restriction as key factors for developing an eating disorder. So why are teens and children so vulnerable? More vulnerable than adults? I think it relates to their developmental stage and their brain development. Kids are black and white thinkers. I've had girls as young as 7 and 8 be committed to the ideas of dieting and unable to see and understand a more flexible approach with eating. Teens are taking risks, so they will try things, crash diets and cleanses, even if they know they're dangerous. Cognitively, teens aren't fully operational and developed in their rational thinking like we adults are. All kids and teens are at a vulnerable time of self-image, self-esteem development, and when you put all this together, I think it creates a perfect storm for an eating disorder. When you look at the research, it's pretty clear. Dieting may potentially lead to weight gain or an eating disorder. And honestly, I believe this is far too great a risk to gamble with. If you want to read my piece in U.S. News and World Report, I'll include the link to the show notes so you can read it at your leisure. Last, I want to also mention that I think we have a very short-sighted focus on food and exercise when it comes to weight status. We typically point the finger at food as the culprit, as a reason, and we play the blame game saying this food is bad and you shouldn't be eating it and you're not eating enough of this great, good, healthy food. We also encourage more exercise, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But when we act like it is the reason for a person's weight status, we really end up alienating that person from truly embodying and enjoying exercise or even eating well. There is some truth to you need to eat a well-balanced, nutritious diet and exercise. There is truth to that, but there's more to the story. There's a more holistic approach. Kids need to be encouraged and embraced and supported in all angles of their development. So not just food and exercise, but feeding and sleep and learning about food and nutrition and eating. And all of these things need to be done very carefully and very positively. Yes, diets are dangerous. Too much focus on food and exercise can be counterproductive and can cause problems. Negative feeding, though, can also interfere. And if you know somebody or know families, you probably see all sorts of feeding that gets off track. I've talked about feeding a lot on this podcast. I write about it a lot on my blog too. It's something that I feel like parents aren't always in the know about and can be making mistakes in that area without even knowing it. Sleep, a safe environment, and nutritious, balanced food, they all do matter. And I'm going to get into the food and feeding approach that I encourage in my own home and with my clients soon. But I want to encourage other aspects of this whole child approach, like body kindness, mindful eating, intuitive eating, and health at every size. These concepts I'm not going to cover today, but they should be included as well. Other people do a great job of covering these concepts. Body Kindness by Rebecca Scritchfield, How to Raise a Mindful Eater by Marianne Jacobson, The Health at Every Size Movement, Intuitive Eating, the website and the book. You can go to the show notes. You'll find the links for these resources that you can dig into as well over at jillcastle.com/054. So, how can you help a heavy kid? I did turn to some of my colleagues in childhood nutrition for their perspective, and I want to share it here with you. Lauren Sharifi, a registered dietitian, says focusing on weight, restricting foods, and amounts of foods can negatively impact a child's body image and potentially lead to disordered eating. Rather, parents can focus on engaging in healthy habits with their kids, for example, eating 3 meals a day, offering a variety of foods and giving access to those foods, and when possible, eating together. Amy Reed, who's located in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, says, do not reward with food. For example, I have had several families that will take their kids out for ice cream when they meet their health goals. They can still have ice cream, but don't make them earn it. Adina Pearson, a dietitian in the state of Washington, says, don't tell your child, you're not fat, as if being fat would be a horrible thing. Don't jump from the weight conversation into a let's eat healthier and exercise convo, because eating well and finding ways to move should be done regardless of weight. Amen. I totally agree. And mixing the two or connecting them make healthy behaviors about weight control. Deborah Malkoff Cohen, a dietitian in New York City, says, it is important to have everyone who is a caretaker on board with your nutrition goals, including nannies, grandparents, babysitters, relatives, and more. Many want to sneak candy and goodies to children, which is a terrible message. If your children are with other caregivers, everyone needs to be on the same page to avoid mixed messages and sabotage. Megan Boitano, a dietitian in Boston, says, I was an overweight child. My mom always showed me unconditional acceptance and love. Other kids and adults certainly did not. I always knew that I could come to her when feeling hurt and find comfort and strength. Never judgment. This was my rock, as the world is unkind. I always felt worthy and loved unconditionally by my mom. This was essential. Megan elegantly outlines how we can be as parents to our bigger kids. Lisa Kotler suggests that parents explain body type and that each child is a unique individual. Just because they have a higher BMI doesn't necessarily mean they are unhealthy or carrying extra unhealthy amounts of fat on their bodies. Also, there is no ideal weight for a child, as they are always growing. Michelle Scott says parents need to change what they are doing. If they are heavy too, it is a chance to have the whole family benefit, but starting with some simple changes, like only buying one small package of chips they all share, only having soda once a week. If only the child is heavy, they can gradually substitute healthier foods one at a time, or engage the child in meal prep, shopping, and making sure to leave the junkier stuff in the store. They may need a nutrition coach to keep them going and to educate them if necessary. So when I think about my colleagues and the information that they share, I think all of it is great. And I also think that it really runs the gamut how broad and how much you can do as a parent, taking care of and raising a child who might be bigger. So as you listen here, you might be thinking, geez, there is a lot to consider when being holistic in our everyday parenting of children, whether they be bigger or not. I believe you should parent your child with love and limits, no matter their size, weight, or shape. But I do have some more things I want you to think about. So I want to cover a few items, and I'm putting it under this category of what is helpful for the heavy child and what can hurt. And honestly, all of these things are beneficial and potentially hurtful for any child, regardless of their weight. So bear with me as we go through these different categories. So there's 6 different categories. The first one we will talk about, just to give you an overview, unconditional love and support versus shame and blame. The second one will be whole family approach versus singling out the child. Food balance versus good or bad foods. Scheduled feeding versus willy-nilly meals and snacks. Advocating exercise versus forcing activities. And last, sleep routines versus late night chaos. So let's dig into the first one. And there's a lot of stuff here to unpack. So unconditional love and support versus shame and blame. So I think it's pretty fair to say we all adore our kids. For me, they are my greatest blessing and accomplishment. I would never do anything to intentionally harm them. And I believe most parents feel the same way. Our most important job is to love our children, no matter what. Love is what nourishes their heart, spirit, and soul. They need it, literally, to grow and develop into productive, healthy, caring adults. But sometimes when it comes to the bigger child, the one who carries extra weight or who is naturally bigger boned, sometimes we can lose our sense of loving unconditionally. Weight talk, talking about a child's weight or commenting on their shape of their body or where they might be carrying extra weight, can damage them. Constantly talking about healthy eating or a child's performance when they eat, whether they eat this food, which is healthy for you, or that food, which is not healthy for you, can also cause damage. So I want you to take great care in what you say to your children when it comes to weight and eating and food. Shame, blame, bullying. We know these things create stigma. They stigmatize a child, and this can harm their self-esteem, increasing the risk of disordered eating and eating disorders, even self-harm and suicide. So we don't want to have our children in situations where they are feeling shame or being blamed or bullied. I think, and I know you know this in your heart of hearts, that we should all love our children no matter what. All kids need to know they have a safe place to land, a shoulder to cry on, and someone who has their back. And that is you. If you have food issues, if you grew up with a childhood where you were shamed and blamed, bullied, stigmatized, get help. If you did grow up that way and you do carry remaining issues, you will likely be transferring those issues onto your child, probably unknowingly. I was recently with family members, distant family members of mine, and one of my family members constantly talked about her weight, her other relatives' weight, asking what other people weighed, making statements about people, how good they looked or their appearance or how thin they looked, about how much she was eating, and it was always comments about eating too much. And for me, as a healthcare provider, the red flags were flying. But honestly, as a human being, I felt suffocated. The banter was exhausting, unproductive, and frankly, hurtful. I could only imagine what it was like to grow up with a mother who was so focused on the topics of food, weight, and eating. So obviously, unconditional love and support is where it's at. Check yourself. I've done this. I have a 21-year-old, as you know, and I still check myself and make sure that how I talk and what I say is as positive and encouraging and empowering as I can possibly make it while being authentically truthful as well. So sometimes we just have to step back and check ourselves, but do make sure that you are favoring unconditional love and support, and you are steering clear from shame and blame. The second topic I want to talk about is this whole family approach versus singling out the child. And remember, we're talking about things that help the heavier or bigger child versus things that can harm them. So the whole family approach is something that can help, and the singling out the child is something that can harm. So as a family who might have a child who's bigger, you still come together and you eat the same food. You don't give one child or the bigger child or the heavier child chicken while everyone else is eating lasagna. So it's everybody together at meal times and everybody eating the same food. I talk about this a lot in counseling with the families that I work with, and there are ways that you can serve all of the same food in a very healthy way, but we don't want to single out the child by giving him different food. You want to have family meals that are positive, and one of the easiest ways to make family meals more positive is to nix the weight talk and the eating performance conversations and make that table a place to connect on a positive level and a place where you talk about anything but food and eating. You also want to stay away from pressuring your child to eat certain foods or to not eat other foods or to refrain from second helpings. You really just want to model what a healthy meal is. So that means make a healthy, nicely balanced meal that includes most of the food groups, put it on the table, and then allow your children to eat until they feel satisfied. I don't want you to reward your child with dessert for eating his vegetables. Again, these are negative feeding practices and they tend to backfire. They can lead a child to be more focused on foods that aren't nutritious for their bodies and can also lead them to become more focused and triggered by food. The whole family should be eating this nutritious diet and also moving or having activity or exercise most days of the week. And so if one child needs to improve exercise, To me, that means the whole family needs to improve activity levels. Once I was working with a whole family who came to me on the recommendation from their pediatrician for their daughter who was gaining weight at a rapid pace. So we were working on all the things I typically address: better food balance, planned treats, positive feeding, exercise, sleep, and other healthier habits, with a goal of arresting any further weight gain. They were doing great. But at one point, the daughter started to gain weight again. And so through counseling, it came to light that the father was hiding candy bars in his work desk at home and had a refrigerator full of soda in the basement. The daughter had discovered these things and had started sneaking these foods. This is partly why I tell you this story, because it's important that the whole family is on board, that everybody's making the same changes. When it's not that case, it becomes very challenging for that child to live in that environment. The third area is to address food balance versus good foods and bad foods. So again, what helps? A nutritious food balance. What can harm the heavier child? This whole good food versus bad food ideal. So ideally, you want to represent all those food groups. Kids do need a balance of foods to get those 40 different nutrients they need every day to grow well. If they are resistant eaters or picky eaters, you'll want to be working on food exposure. I'm not going to get into that now, but I do have several resources for this on my website, including a book called Try New Food. You can find that in the show notes. You don't want to avoid fat as a nutrient. So you know the nutrients are carbohydrate, protein, and fat. You don't want to eliminate fat. Fat is satisfying and it's filling and it makes food taste delicious. So there is some thought that avoiding fat has made us more likely to eat refined carbohydrates, like sugary foods or refined flours and refined grains. There are other indications that a bit more fat in the diet is actually healthy, especially for bigger kids who carry extra unhealthy weight and may be showing signs of insulin resistance. So again, if this might be something that you're dealing with, seek out a registered dietitian, nutritionist for help, because there might be some tweaking in the food components that could actually help your child. Have a plan for sweets and treats, because an overall flexible strategy for sweets works well, but you do need a sweet policy. If you don't have one, in my experience, families struggle with that. And if a family's struggling with that, it means the child is struggling with that. Black and white thinking about food doesn't help children learn about all foods. And while an overconsumption of certain foods can be problematic, as the parent, you need to find a healthy way to balance and expose your child to them so they learn to navigate them in their world. Certain items in the day-to-day diet can encourage excess weight if overly consumed. Things like sugar-sweetened drinks, candy, dessert foods, and fried foods. If these foods are occasionally eaten, then I would not worry about them. However, if they have a stronghold in your child's diet, meaning they appear every day more than once, then it might be helpful to wean down or downgrade them. So when we talk about drinks like sugar-sweetened beverages, soda, lemonade, fruit drinks, sports drinks, even coffee drinks, that's what we're talking about. So find ways that you can downgrade those sugar-added beverages because they aren't loaded with nutrition at all. They're just straight up sugar. And your child, while they can have that occasionally, it shouldn't be occurring on a regular basis. So instead, water is the best drink ever. It's calorie-free, portable, easy to flavor naturally. So make sure it's readily available. You can use reusable water bottles, a water bubbler, a cold pitcher of water in the refrigerator. You can flavor that if you need to with a spritz of citrus, which really makes it taste a lot more palatable for children. You know, I've talked about fun foods in the past on the podcast. Fun foods are those foods that are typically offered at celebrations. such as desserts, candy, chips, other snack foods. And unfortunately, many kids and teens are eating too many of these foods in their diet. To shave off some calories, stop the weekly shopping for these items. And if you do, pick 1 or 2 fun foods to have in the house. You can read about the 90-10 rule over on my blog. I'll include the links in the show notes. It outlines how to balance the food groups your child eats every day with those more indulgent foods that can become a problem if overconsumed. Okay, on to the next one. Scheduled feeding is a huge help for all kids, and it will help the bigger child too, versus willy-nilly meals and snacks. That's a mouthful, willy-nilly. That is not helpful and can be harmful. So a structure and timed approach with meals and snacks builds predictability, appetite regulation, and healthy habits. Alternatively, being all over the map with feeding your child can make them food-focused, seeking extra food, hungry, and prone to make poor food choices. So one way you can improve on this is to keep meals and snacks in the same location. So kitchen table's a great place. If you can do that every day for most meals and snacks, you're doing great. Schedule the timing of meals and snacks so that every 3 to 4 hours, children are having something to eat, be it a meal or a snack, and every 4 to 5 hours for a teenager. This helps set up that structure so that your child can eat, feel satisfied, have some time to empty the stomach, build the appetite back up, feel hungry, and then it's time to eat again. Close your kitchen after meals and snacks. Super important and a great message to send kids. It really sets up the predictability of when it's time to eat, and when that kitchen is closed, we're not eating. We are doing other things, perhaps activities or hobbies that your children like to do. Don't skip meals. Skipping meals, especially breakfast and lunch, is a big no-no and a common mistake many kids and teens make. Aside from missing out on important nutrients, skipping meals underfeeds the body for its daily work, whether it be playing a sport, other physical activity, or learning. Perhaps worst of all, it can lead to a voracious appetite and a probability of overeating late in the day when your child or teen is unwinding and may be more sedentary. Instead, front load your day with a healthy breakfast and lunch, and light load eating at the end of the day. And for teens particularly, late night eating can become a problem. Most people don't move their bodies very much at all in the evening, so anything that is eaten generally gets processed and stored if it's not burned off. So in other words, late night eating can mean extra calories and weight gain if it gets out of control. If your child or teen is in this unhealthy habit, suggest a new role or a new routine, such as light exercise, a cup of herbal tea, or going to bed earlier. Advocating exercise versus forcing activities. I believe exercise should be part of every human's day-to-day routine, period. Age doesn't matter, weight doesn't matter. Everybody should be moving their bodies every day because exercise has many benefits. In children, it really is tied to building up their self-esteem, their body confidence, their metabolic health, and chronic disease prevention. Plus, it can be a boatload of fun. Give your kids lots of ideas about exercise and activities that move the body through space. Advocate for them and let your child choose what to do. Just getting outside to play every day is a healthy habit anyone can adopt. Don't force your child, though. You know, some parents have this idea that if they force their child to be on a sports team or to jump on a treadmill or start counting their steps, they're doing the right thing. And it really depends on your child and his personality and how much focus you're putting on it. So be careful in this area. I think that a forced march can be a problem for some kids. And ideally, we want kids to enjoy exercise. And you can reduce the chances of this when you force it to happen. Video games and TV is a big one for kids today, and unfortunately, I think it's growing into a bigger issue. But one way that you can encourage more physical activity is to place limits on TV time and video or screen time. The current recommendations are to limit screen time to about 2 hours per day. And the overwhelming response I get from kids and parents these days is that there is far more than 2 hours of screen time happening. So how can you change this in your home? Last, I want to talk about sleep routines versus late night chaos. So a sleep routine is good for any child, and it's going to be good for the bigger child too, versus late night chaos and no routine. So the amount of sleep a child gets every night has been tied to their weight status. The fewer hours of sleep, the higher the risk of excess unhealthy weight or excess body fat. Kids and teens need at least 7 hours of sleep. So you want to try to get your child on a routine with going to bed. Have a set bedtime, a series of steps you move through before bedtime. It might be a shower or a bath, reading books, a nighttime snack, brushing the teeth, then off to bed. You also want to downgrade the electronics. They keep the brain alert and make it harder to fall asleep. So there's so much we can do as parents to help our kids, whether they are bigger, heavier, or not. You see, all of the things I've outlined are good, healthy, positive practices for any child, regardless of their weight status. They help you support your child to be healthy inside and out. They help you teach and guide your child to navigate our food world and stay in touch with his or her body and emotional needs. The gist of this show is to help you understand the way to parent the bigger kid without stigmatizing or hurting him. And while I recognize it may be hard to do this because worry and fear can take over and cause you to do hurtful things when you don't intend to, it's important, even essential, that you map out a plan to work on those areas where you might not have it all together. To reevaluate your day-to-day comments, attitudes, and actions, to start to put into place those areas that aren't fully embraced in your family feeding, eating, and living habits. Thank you for listening today. I'm Jill Castle, and the purpose of this podcast is to help you nourish your child, no matter his weight, shape, or size, inside and out. You can find the show notes over at jillcastle.com/054. That's 054 for episode number 54. Join my Facebook page, The Nourished Child, subscribe to my Monday morning newsletter, and subscribe to this show so you get a notification every time I release a new one. If you know you can do better by your child, check out the Kids Healthy Weight Project online program, a self-study course you can get started on today. Or, if you want to join me, be part of a group of parents and get direct coaching and support. I'll be launching the Kids Healthy Weight Project parent group in May. Over a 5-week period, you'll get access to the full course delivered in weekly modules. You'll also get me as I lead you through the program with weekly group coaching calls. Just shoot me an email and let me know if you're interested. Again, thanks for joining me today. I'm so very glad to connect with you. Please be sure to give the child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.